I'm waiting for the clock to tell me how much time we have.
What do you like, John?
That's exactly what I needed to hear. Okay.
We're all that stands between them and the bar, though.
So long as they're buying, I'm okay with that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be in this session with you this afternoon. I think most of you were here for General Petraeus, Dave Petraeus' introduction. I won't go into a lot of detail on that. I think the most important thing, or the proudest thing about him, is that he was a paratrooper. And as a Marine infantryman, serving alongside a paratrooper in my career was a great privilege. Dave Petraeus.
But we had 3 assignments together. You need.
Yes, well, I'm getting to that. Because if I don't say that, I'll get that. General Petraeus is probably, I think I'm right, the only commander in modern American history to command 2 theaters of war. Now that is a remarkable accomplishment, and it comes from extraordinary performance in every position he ever had in the United States Army. And it was my privilege to work for him on several occasions in the Anbar province in Iraq in 06, 7, and 8. Later, I was his deputy in the Central Command. And Central Command, for those of you who don't know, is the command that stretches from Egypt in the west, all across the Middle East, Central Asia, to the line of contact between Pakistan and India. That's an enormous command, and I had the opportunity to watch him closely and to learn a great deal from him. And then later, I would have the great honor of taking command of his 2nd theater of war command in Afghanistan, and that was a great privilege to work for him. He would then go on almost immediately to be the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Extraordinary performance there, but again, at a personal level, he and I were coordinating back and forth across the border of Afghanistan and the tribal areas, because between what CIA was able to do for me across the border, what I was able to do on my side, we had an enormous amount of accomplishment in terms of dealing with the movement of the Taliban, but very importantly, Al-Qaeda as well. And of course, he would become the chair of the KKR Global Institute, and now is a partner in KKR, and is in every possible way, as you just heard, a leader still on the front line of influencing America in terms of getting it right and offering wise policy advice to our leadership in all forms and fashion. It's great to be with you, sir.
Thank you, Marine.
Amos Yadlin is a very dear friend as well. He and I had the opportunity to work together when I was Dave's deputy. Amos was leading the Israeli Defense Intelligence. He is an extraordinary fighter pilot and served as a fighter pilot from the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, all the way up to his retirement. He has hundreds of combat missions across the Middle East, to include, very importantly, a mission where he put the first 2 2,000-pound bombs through the core of the Iraqi reactor, the Osirak reactor, as one of the F-16 pilots on that strike mission to take out the Iraqi nuclear capability. After retirement from the Israeli Air Force, but after his time in the cockpit, he became the commander of Israeli Defense Intelligence. An extraordinarily important job. Did that for 5 years, as I recall. He and I worked together very closely with Dave's leadership on some pretty sensitive issues across the region. Once he retired from the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, he would become the director of the Institute for National Security Studies, a think tank in Israel. It is the premier think tank in Israel. It is the premier think tank in the region. And when I was president of Brookings and he was the director of INSS, we felt the reverberations of that scholarship all around the world. And he did an extraordinary job doing that as well. He would ultimately depart from INSS and began an organization called Mind Israel, where, and you'll learn in just a moment, he still is very active in providing advice and consultant advice to the leadership of Israel across the board. So we're really fortunate to have these two here today. And this morning, we talked about Europe's considerations of the United States. What's happening in Europe today? And we touched a third rail on a number of occasions this morning. And so today, right now, we're going to drop due south into the Middle East, and this panel is called The Future of the Middle East. We're going to need to get to it because our time is not all that long today. We'd love to be with you here all afternoon, and we could easily be. But let me come first to Amos. Pausing for just a second to remember the horrific events of 7 October 2023. It began a sequence of events of hard fighting, hard decision-making, hard risk-taking, that I don't use this term very often because it's often trite, but it created a result of tectonic changes in the Middle East we've not seen for generations. And what I'd like to do is ask Amos to take us through those events and tell us why the Middle East is different today. Very importantly, to talk a bit about Syria, but also to talk about what are the opportunities that Israel, and through Israel, its dear allies and its great supporter, the United States, what are the opportunities that we can face? And then I'm going to ask General Petraeus, having been the commander of the Central Command and responsible for all of that area, how he sees it as well. So, Amos, please, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, General Allen. David, we worked together.
Yep.
And
We weren't able to say that we worked together, though, at that time.
No.
Keep in mind that Israel was not part of U.S. Central Command.
yeah,
And so all of our meetings had to essentially be clandestine.
That's right.
And in fact, John was deputized to do a number of that, but then I also did it with the Chief of Defense Staff. But it always had to be in an area that was not in public view.
but since you left, Israel was moved from European command to Central Command.
Long overdue.
And
Long overdue.
General Kurila is almost a member of the Israeli General Staff.
That's the
He
current
was
Central
with
Command
us
commander.
from the
Great guy.
7th of October
Yep.
all the way through a war in 7 fronts. And Israel went to a war in 7 fronts.
Yep.
So we started on a very tough day. You have to compare it as if a terror organization from Mexico would have killed 18,000 Americans in their beds, not soldiers, in their bed on the weekend, and kidnapped 4,000 Americans to Mexico. I'm not sure that anybody would have limited the US to do what it has to do in this case. In a way, Sinwar and Nasrallah, building on your phrase from the last session, have made Israel great again.
Yeah.
After 15 months of war. But after saying that, tectonic changes, but not an unconditional surrender.
Right.
We still face a war in 7 fronts that is not resolved. There is a ceasefire now in most of the fronts. In Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Iran, in Yemen, and not so much in the West Bank. But the IDF is fighting in 7 fronts, and they have to be ready to resume it, because none of our enemy becomes Zionist. None of our enemy is willing to demilitarize or de-radicalize their opinions. So it's a huge challenge today to take advantage of the huge achievement. So who is if you look at the Middle East today compared to 6th of October, there are basically 4 winners. One of them is Israel, as of today. Second is the US. The US was proven to be the only reliable ally for a Middle East country. Where is Russia when Assad collapsed? Where is China when the whole business happened? The whole war, China was absent. So the US is a big winner of this war. It supported Israel, both with the moral declaration who is the right and who is wrong, who is the good and who is the bad, and then sending a lot of ammunition and $14 billion, and supporting Israel in the most important diplomatic front on the UN Security Council. So the US is a winning. Turkey belongs to the winning side. Finally, they got Iran out of Syria, and they are able now to be the most important regional power in Syria. They having achievement against the Kurds, which is not a good thing, but in the eye of the Turks, it's a winning. And then the Saudis, that were smart not to be involved, and wait to the result of the war to go forward. Who are the losers? First of all, Hezbollah. Hezbollah was a formidable power, more ballistic missiles than any country in the world, and drones, and the Radwan force on our border. It was a serious and very dangerous. By the way, Nasrallah died in his bunker thinking that he is deterring Israel because of its power. He thought that Israel will never go to war with him because Israel will be destroyed from the numbers that you mentioned. Not all of them can reach Tel Aviv,
right.
But he had thousands of ballistic missiles with half a ton warhead that could destroy most of Tel Aviv and the Israeli Air Force bases and the rest of our military infrastructure. So the winning over Hezbollah is huge, and Hezbollah, that used to be the #1 force in Lebanon. They were the strongest military power and the strongest political power, and nothing was done in Lebanon if Hezbollah didn't want it to happen.
Right.
So they are gone as a military power. Syria, the Assad regime. The Assad regime was one of the worst regimes in the world. Assad killed 600,000 people from his own people. 10 million are not living in the homes that they used to live 15 years ago. 5 million of them all over the Middle East and Europe, and 5 million are displaced in Syria. The fact that the Assad regime is gone is very important if you look at the Iranian axis of evil. Iran, the Shia militia in Iraq, Syria, Hezbollah. So it was broken in the middle. 2011, I wrote a piece with Rob Satloff, which say it's better the devil you don't know than the devil you know. So we have now the devil we don't know. We can discuss it later.
Yep.
But no doubt that nothing can be worse than Assad. Then Iran is a loser. They lost their position around Israel. They created a ring of fire around Israel because they don't want to have their forces. They don't want to pay with their soldiers, but they want that the Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Iraqis will be around Israel with a lot of Iranian money and Iranian rockets. So this ring is now broken, and Iran was found vulnerable to an Israeli attacks. And Israel has the best air defense in the world that basically stopped an Iranian attack in a number that was almost imaginary, 99% of stopping 300 projectiles that were fired simultaneously to reach Israel in the same time. Drones that were launched 8-9 hours before they reach Israel. Cruise missiles that were launched 4 hours, 3 hours before they reach. And ballistic missiles that reach in the same time, flying 11 to 12 minutes. All of them coming in the same time, 1% penetrated due to a very good multi-layer system. And a coalition. And a coalition.
Yep.
US forces.
1/3 of them knocked down by the US.
Absolutely, and even some Arab countries will not mention names.
Right.
That's right.
Okay? So Iran is a loser, and Russia is a loser. Because why Assad failed? In 2015, he was about to be defeated. Who saved him? The Russian with Air Force, Hezbollah on the ground coming to help him against the opposition, and the Iranians. Russia was in Ukraine this time. Hezbollah collapsed. And Israel warned Iran not to come and help Assad, and that's why he was defeated. So he belonged to the losers. Unfortunately, another losers are the Kurds. That now, they used to have the SDF with the Sunni Arabs. Now the Sunni Arabs are going to the regime, And Turkey is much more aggressive against the Turks, and this is not good.
But we're still there with them, and I hope that we will keep them there.
You know, anytime your president is getting to the White House, he has an idea to disengage from Syria.
Yep.
So let's hope that you will change his mind as you did last time.
And for the audience, though, the Kurds really were instrumental in beating ISIS on the ground. So while we were dealing with al-Qaeda in the west of Syria and those militia forces, the Kurds, with our American special forces, beat ISIS on the ground in Syria. And so when Amos says the Kurds are one of the losers here, they really are, and they have been a great ally for us. I know they treated General Petraeus in 101st very, very well when he led that division in combat into Kurdistan.
So let's now go to...
We should remember that John, as ambassador, Alan, built the counter-ISIS coalition, which was a huge achievement over the years and ultimately did lead, obviously, to the elimination of the Islamic State in northern Iraq and also northeastern Syria.
So let's go now to the grand strategies that Israel should adapt.
Yes.
Because we still cope with 7 fronts. The key is Gaza, but Gaza is not the most important issue. Israel can advance peace in the Middle East by having Abraham Accord 2.0 with the Saudis. But this depends on ending the war in Gaza and achieve some political horizon for the Palestinians. Second is Iran. This is a huge opportunity to deal with Iran. Iran was never so weak. However, Iran was never so close to the bomb, with enough fissile material for 10 bombs.
Nuclear
Nuclear bombs, of course. So there is an opportunity to do a coalition of the willing. Israel, the US, and the pragmatic Arabs against Iran, who is threatening all the 3 of them. All the 3 of them. So if you are smart enough to end the war in Gaza, bring back the hostages, yes, it will not allow us to achieve all 3 goals that General Petraeus spoke before. But history is not ending this quarter. We can deal with Hamas later. But we need the hostages back in Israel. Why Israel was so successful against Hezbollah and so, let's say, not that successful against Hamas? First, the level of intelligence. On Hezbollah, we collected for 15 years the best intelligence we could have to destroy every ballistic missile. Because if you are a farmer in one of the villages in Lebanon and you build your home, Hezbollah is coming, giving you $50,000 or whatever the price for another room. You have a bedroom, you have a living room, you have a room for the kids, and you have a room for a missile. And this is maybe a ballistic missile, which go from here to there. Then you need to open the roof, or a cruise missile, so it's like a roof in the garage. And Israel knew about 3,000 of them. We didn't want to kill the families. We transmit them, we call them, leave your home.
That's right.
But 3,000 missiles were destroyed. This is not the case in Gaza. The intelligence on Gaza was not that important because Iran was number 1, Syria was number 2, and Hezbollah was number 3, or you can switch it. Hamas was not there. Second, we didn't have any hostages in Lebanon, which gave us a lot of capabilities to go. You know how many tons basically ended the life of Nasrallah? 80, not 2. 2 bombs.
8-0.
8-0 Mark 84 to make sure that he's gone this time. Okay? So the last important issue is the underground. The underground facilities, that 500 kilometers of underground were in Gaza, and they were not in Lebanon. It's much more difficult to make a tunnel in Lebanon. It's a rock. In Gaza, it's sand. Anyway, we need to finish the war in Gaza. and then it will enable us to do the normalization with the Saudis, and then deal with the main issue, which is still Iran nuclear program. Because this is the only existential threat to Israel, that Iran will have the bomb. Because the mutual assured destruction may not work. And we must remember that we haven't understood the nature of the jihadic thinking of Sinwar. Because any general who will look at the balance of power between the Hamas and the IDF says it makes no sense to start a war against Israel. They will pay a high price. And they paid a high price. But they doesn't care. They didn't care. Because 50,000 Palestinians for Hamas is nothing. And they are willing to sacrifice it. And they are not thinking like us. And they may think that 72 virgins are waiting there, and destroying Israel, you get two prices in one ticket. So nuclear weapon at the hand of Iran is unacceptable. So being together with the Saudis who are thinking the same, with the Americans who are thinking the same. I have by now white hair. I saw all your last presidents, Democrats, Republicans, each one of them saying that Iran will not have a nuclear bomb. However, they never say what they will do if Iran will break out with a bomb. And we need to have a united, joint plan how to fulfill this commitment of the American president together, build on trust, build on strategic plan and operational plan. This is what I say a responsible leader of Israel will do. End Gaza, peace with the Saudis, deal with Iran.
Amos, you mentioned briefly the 7 fronts, and one front that you didn't put a lot of emphasis on is the Houthis. You talk about the Houthis and how you encountered them and how you dealt with the Houthis.
So
because they were a real menace in the southern Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden, and Israel dealt with that.
Yeah, the Houthis have done two things towards Israel. They launched missiles that they got from Iran, but in the beginning of the war, the maximum range of the missiles were Eilat. For those who are not know the geography of Israel, Eilat is the southern city of Israel, and it was not beyond that. So good air defense, and nobody paid attention. Then they start to launch drones that reached Tel Aviv, and they were smart enough to take some explosive from the warhead and add more fuel, and the missiles will go all the way to the center of Israel. And this induced an Israeli reaction. Because until then, when I talk to my leadership, say, how come they are firing at Israel and you're doing nothing? Say, Amos, we have 6 fronts. We don't want to add another one, and we leave it to the Americans. However, the Americans were unable to stop it, and what basically happened also that the southern port of Israel in Eilat was unemployed, and nothing could come to Israel from China, from India, from Japan, South Korea. By the way, who suffered more? The Egyptians, because the naval movement through the Suez Canal, and Egypt lost billions of dollars, but they haven't joined the coalition. So Israel decided to go after the Houthis. In this case, it's easier because they are a country. They are a terror organization, but they took over a country. And you go first on their infrastructure, on the ports, on the power station. But once again, they are not so sensitive as you think. They get used to live without electricity. Yeah. So we need to develop more sophisticated way, which has intelligence, real-time attacks on their leaders, as we did for Nasrallah, and the coalition.
Yep.
The Saudis are suffering much more than us. The UAE is an enemy of the Houthis. And this is waiting, as I say, history is not finished by now. But the Houthis should be removed from power. And unlike Hezbollah and the Shia militia in Iraq, they are not a pure Iranian proxy. They now feel that they are the main power, that the whole coalition were not defeated. They suffered, but they have not defeated. And now they have ambition vis-a-vis Africa,
That's right.
Somalia, Sudan, as I say, Saudi, UAE, and this should wait for a future cooperation.
And this goes to the general's point about how something happening in one place will cause reverberations in other places. One quick, before I come to the CENTCOM commander, one other quick question, very technical question. How did the American F-35s perform?
The American F-35
Because many of you out there are doing something for the F-35, so please, almost.
is unbelievably advanced and good airplane. It's not only being possible to overcome the radar early warning and fire guided missiles because it's very low RCS. It's a stealth airplane. At the same time, it is a fighter. And more than that, it is also intelligence gathering and a battlefield picture. So it is doing a great job. We don't have in this Middle East war the classical air engagement or dogfight because there are not MiGs around. But they did a very good job against cruise missiles and drones. And I belong to those who think that this kind of airplanes are still very much needed. Don't put them aside when you have all these drones. Because in military history, to every threat, within 5 years, sometimes even earlier, you find the technical solution to defend against it. And all these drones, when there will be a laser, energy interceptors, may be not that effective as they are today when we are exposed to them. And you cannot destroy Nasrallah bunker with 80 Mark 84 with drones. You cannot penetrate the nuclear facilities of Iran with drones. And you cannot, there is another missions, you cannot go all the way to Yemen to achieve a strategic effect with drones. So don't send your pilots to retirement too early.
Okay.
It's actually a very important question because there was a lot of doubt about the capacity and capability of the Iranian air and ballistic missile defenses, which they got from Russia, the S-300. And there was a big concern about how the F-35s would perform, and that answered that question. Not only did Israel penetrate the air defenses, they actually reduced them very, very considerably. They did enormous damage to the integrated air and ballistic missile defenses of Iran, which is very important if we decide to carry out the operation to destroy the Iran nuclear program. They also reduced the ability of Iran to make 3 or so solid fuel rocket engines every day to 1 or 2 a week. And that's a huge factor as well, given that that's one of the means for retaliation that Iran was trying to amass.
So, sir, as your deputy commander, let me ask my commander, Commander of CENTCOM, your view on what Amos has just said.
Well, I very, very much aligned with Amos in just about everything, although we have a little bit different view on Gaza. Agree fully the achievement against Hezbollah, as I mentioned earlier, just extraordinary. And that supply chain operation was the key to this because they could have, with effective command control communications, been able to just put thousands and thousands of projectiles into Israeli airspace. And as good as that integrated air and ballistic missile defense is, it can be overwhelmed. And so they that was the real key to enabling them to carry out the sustained, intense air campaign that went after all of these locations in which Israel had been accumulating intelligence. And this, by the way, changed the dynamics in Lebanon because they hadn't even been able to agree on a president for a year. They all of a sudden got a president because Hezbollah was no longer as effective remotely. They got an agreement on the Speaker of the Parliament after a year of wrangling, and it's not the preferred Hezbollah candidate, it's another Shia coalition. And the Lebanese armed forces are able to do something they'd never been able to do before, which is to get down actually on the border between northern Israel and the Litani River, which was controlled by Hezbollah before. There was an incapable UN peacekeeping force that couldn't prevent them from doing what they were doing to Israel. So that's an extraordinary accomplishment. When it comes to Syria, again, a real major seismic change. I hope that we will, though, support the government to the extent that we can, give them every chance to prove or disprove, but ideally prove that they actually will be a government for all of the different elements in Syria with minority rights, not just majority rule. I'm a tiny bit concerned at times that Israel seems to maybe just allow them just to be weak and ineffective, and I think that actually is the wrong approach. But again, that's not hard, fast right now, and I hope the U.S. will lead the way in that regard. We didn't talk about Iraq. You'd mentioned briefly the Iranian-supported Shia militia in Iraq. We defeated those, by the way, in the second year of the surge after destroying what became the Islamic State later on. We need to keep U.S. forces there. I talk to the Prime Minister every time at Munich. He seemed a little bit more solid now. That's a very important presence, both to help the Iraqis identify where the remnants of the Islamic State are in their territory, and also to provide support in various ways for our forces that are on the ground in northeastern Syria, where the force that we built of Syrian Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces, has kept a grip on the Islamic State and actually controls a large detention facility that has tens of thousands of family members of former ISIS fighters and thousands of actual Islamic State operatives as well.
Who are now stateless as well.
They are, and it's a real challenge because a lot of them came from outside Syria and their countries will not accept them back home. It's a real frustration for all involved with that. I agree also, by the way, on the F-35 and keeping, certainly you don't, as I said, you don't transform everything, but you got to transform a lot of it. But you have to understand the nature of the war, what's the nature of the air defenses and all the rest of that, and every war is unique in that regard. The future, actually, I think of counter-drone operations, I believe will be high-powered microwave, even more than lasers. It has in the tests, it's actually deployed in an undisclosed location. I should acknowledge that I'm an investor in it. And it's extraordinarily effective, 100% again in the tests. With respect to the Iran nuclear program, as John well knows, we developed the plan for the destruction of that program back in the 2009 and 10 period. Right. We actually rehearsed it one time. This is all publicly known inside the United States. Some of the aircraft flew laps to get to the distances that they would replicate what they would actually do if we carried that out, because they don't come from the region, they come from outside it. Dropped the munitions to prove that we could actually do what we need to do. In some of these, you have to pound 11, 12 bombs through the same hole. It's called 12, what's the term that we used to use for sort of a mission, and we proved we could do it. And also drop the massive ordnance penetrator, which is the key to the destruction of the deeply buried Iranian nuclear facility inside a mountain in Fordo, which the Israelis cannot take out. They don't have the massive ordnance penetrator. They don't even have a plane that can carry it. So that would be one that we would most likely have to do. There's some possibilities in other ways you could get at, but again, I'm a little bit skeptical on that, having war gamed it repeatedly at CENTCOM and then at the CIA. Keep in mind that one of the reasons that Hamas attacked when they did, we believe, was that they were getting concerned that the 2 2.0 of the Abraham Accord was coming soon to a theater near us. In other words, Israel and the Saudis, with our assistance, were getting very close to mutual recognition and so on. And again, that was one of the elements that probably led to the timing of that attack. The Houthis, we need to hammer much harder. Again, the Shia, supported by Iran, with a degree of independence, that control a good bit of Yemen and have terrorized the Red Sea, keeping 75% of the normal traffic going through the Suez Canal, having to go around Africa, shut down the port of Israel, et cetera. And we should have done much more to them. We should have actually helped the Saudis and the Emiratis back when they were engaged in helping the other side of the civil war in Yemen, and we didn't do it at that time. That was the Obama administration that I think we missed a tremendous opportunity. We would not have the situation that we have now. But then we come to Gaza, and with great respect to my longtime comrade and friend, ending Gaza is not easy. Hamas actually has replenished all of that it's lost. There's no shortage of angry, grievance-filled, unemployed young men in Gaza. Certainly they're not combat-effective companies, battalions, and brigades as they were when this whole war in Gaza began. They are not that. They are now much more, you should regard them as guerrillas or insurgents. But there's still a large number of them. To be sure, Iran cannot replenish their stocks because Israel wisely has taken control of the southern border between Gaza and Egypt, known as the Philadelphia Corridor. And it's under that corridor, through tunnels and through the Rafah crossing on that border, that very much of this used to flow. That was the biggest area through which the arms, munitions, materiel, and all the rest of that went into Gaza and enabled them to build a very formidable force that carried out an absolutely barbaric and inhuman or inhumane operation, but one that was diabolically very, very clever. So the challenge is, so as a military guy, you ask your boss, what do you want us to do? And he's laid that out. We want to destroy Hamas. We want to keep them from governing Gaza again, and we want to get the hostages back. And again, I've long felt that there should be a fourth objective, which is to, again, make life better for the Palestinian people without Hamas in their lives. Israel has actually, despite the enormous destruction to Hamas and to the infrastructure, which is necessary because there's so much underground that you've got to go into it with penetrating bombs and so forth, despite all that, they have degraded Hamas very, very considerably. Again, they're no longer combat effective units, but they are still very significant elements of guerrillas. And so they've been degraded but not destroyed, and that's a big distinction. And I should note here that I tend to regard Hamas as the equivalent of the Islamic State. That means that they are not reconcilable, that you have to kill or capture them because you're not going to, in fact, John in particular, in the very dangerous province that he took over when he was a one-star out there and then transformed, we did a lot of that with reconciling with the rank and file of these organizations, the Sunni insurgents in particular, some elements of the tribes and so on. But that's because they're sort of chameleons. They're waiting to see who's going to win. The minute you show that you're really intent about this, you can pull them away and you can actually bring them in. We reconciled with 103,000 former insurgents and Shia militia supported by Iraq during the year and a half of the surge. One of the big ideas for the surge, the second biggest idea, was we cannot kill or capture our way out of an industrial strength insurgency. We have to reconcile with those that we can. Hamas is not reconcilable. This is the equivalent, again, of the Islamic State. And they are Islamist extremists, and they have to be killed or captured. The problem is that the campaign as it is structured right now, which is a counterterrorism campaign where you go in, you kill the bad guys that you can identify, keeping in mind that an awful lot of them are below ground in these hundreds and hundreds of miles of sophisticated underground tunnels and infrastructure. But then they just reconstitute themselves. Now, Israel doesn't want to do what I've proposed that they should do, and I had a very close relationship with the Minister of Defense until he was fired a couple months ago, I guess it is now, Yoav Gallant, who we both respect enormously. And part of the reason he got fired was because he was pushing the prime minister for a political vision of Gaza, which has never been provided. I don't think that the U.S. administration idea of actually depopulating them and then fixing it, that is a non-starter, because the Egyptians and the Jordanians, who will be the destinations for this kind of scheme, they cannot take any more Palestinians. The Jordanians are already outnumbered, if you will, the West Bankers, the Hashemites tribes, are outnumbered already by the Palestinian refugees that they've taken in over a number of years. And that's a huge challenge for the king as he tries to continue to hold elections that have some meaning. And Egypt just can't do this either. They cannot take in anything more that will be a problem for them. So that just is not one that, however attractive in some ways it might be. Beyond that, the Palestinians, even though their territory is hugely damaged and infrastructure destroyed, will not leave their land. So the Egyptian proposal, the counter proposal, if you will, is that they're going to go in and establish a new government, and that government will oversee the rebuilding of it. And I just don't see Hamas allowing that to happen. They have guns. The reason, actually, the humanitarian assistance is flowing so nicely into Gaza until it was stopped the other day as the phase one ran out, was because Hamas is organizing it. So in my view, you have to do what we did during the surge in cities like Fallujah, which he was responsible for, Ramadi, Baquba, Mosul, parts of Baghdad, and other areas. Not all of which are remotely as difficult as Gaza is, again, because of the underground infrastructure. But what we did there is we told the people, we're going to make your lives better by getting al-Qaeda out of your lives. That's right. And we're going to stay there to keep them out. And we created gated communities. We used to tell the Iraqis, you know, you pay a lot of money for a gated community in Florida, and we're giving it to you for free. We would literally put up miles of walls every single night in multiple locations all throughout the most difficult areas in Iraq. And my proposal has been start in the north, come down a kilometer, put an east-west wall. You could do that in a night or two. Actually, you can do it 24 hours a day there. So, and then a couple north-south walls, and you have 3, 4 gated communities. You clear them painstakingly, every building, floor, room, tunnel entrance, and so forth. And this is really hard when it comes to the tunnels in particular, because it's not just one to here. They have offshoots and everything else. But it is doable. And once you have achieved security, and they're gone, Hamas now, there will be some remnants, but they no longer have capacity the way they do now, even after having, again, been degraded very significantly. Then, by the way, then you can bring in NGOs. They can distribute the humanitarian assistance. You could bring in Palestinian security forces that we should have been training at the Jordanian International Police Training Center from the beginning of this. We haven't. That's a missed opportunity. You could bring now the Saudis and the Emiratis and others. They'll come in. They'll even put forces in there. But they're not going to fight Hamas any more than the Egyptians are going to fight Hamas. Those are fellow Arabs, and they're not going to fight, in a sense, for Israel against Hamas, even as hated as Hamas is. And then rinse and repeat. By the way, another key element is biometric ID cards. So we went into Fallujah, that was city, maybe 250, 300,000 at that time, put a wall around the entire city, then did 12 or 13 gated communities inside it. We stayed in them, and we issued biometric ID cards. The Israelis are spectacular at biometrics, and they'll pick up a lot of the remaining Hamas fighters. And you just keep pushing on down. Now, it's really tricky around Gaza City. It's 1 million people, and it's not just the fact that it's 3 or 4 times larger than Fallujah. It's that it's massively more difficult because of the urban structure and because of the underground infrastructure. But I don't see an alternative. If you're fighting insurgents, which is what they are, guerrillas, what you need is a counterinsurgency campaign, a comprehensive civil-military campaign, not a counterterrorism campaign. And by the way, the transition in the surge in Iraq was from doing counterterrorism, clear and leave, and then the enemy fills back. And then we started clear, hold, build, and eventually transition. It's a huge challenge. They have small forces, not big forces. The bulk of the Israeli Defense Forces reserves, so it require a big call-up of reserves. They don't have a counterinsurgency field manual like we did, in fact, during my 3-star tour in the States. They have never done it. They'll pick it up very, very quickly. They're spectacular forces. But that's where I think, and obviously this is not a point of agreement between, again, that many folks there, but I don't see any realistic alternative that can actually achieve security. And keep in mind the words of one of the iconic figures of Vietnam who said, security may be 10% of the problem or 90% of the problem. Whatever it is, it's the first 10% or the first 90%. And there is not security in Gaza right now. And without that, you're just going to have a continued effort to go after them, kill them, capture them, and then leave, and they're going to reconstitute over time. Now, they'll keep getting degraded further and further, but they're not going away. So there's a lot of challenges to this. There's a lot of reasons that I fully understand why folks in Israel don't want to do that. But having done it, I think that I don't see any other alternative.
Sir, let me ask both. We're going to go over here a little bit, but we've had a good tour around the region. We've got an American view, certainly the Israeli view. This is now about the future. And one of the greatest indicators of the potential future for Israel in the region and for Israel's relationship with the Arab states were the Abraham Accords. I mean, they really were revolutionary in its moment, and it was a great diplomatic breakthrough. President Trump deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yep.
The UAE deserves, Mohammed bin Zayed deserves a lot of credit for that. And of course, then the linchpin of all of that is the future of Saudi Arabia in its relationships. Could I just hear from you both? And if we've got the time, I'm going to ask a second question, which is, can we ever expect a two-state outcome? So let's first talk about the future of the Abraham Accords.
Of course, but that's the key to the Abraham Accords.
Yes,
because
so let's talk about that.
What happened when Hamas carried out this horrific attack on 7 October was that it brought the Palestinian issue back to the fore. You remember when I would go see the king in Saudi Arabia, initially, early on, the first, second, and third issue were the Palestinians.
Always.
Then they sort of dropped off, and then it became the Islamic State, it became the Iranians, it became political Islam, it became Yemen, Houthis, and all the rest of this. But this has brought it back to great prominence in Saudi Arabia. And the bar over which the Saudis now have to get is much higher. And it really is some kind of firm, I don't know if I want to use the term ironclad, path to some form of two-state solution. And yet, of course, in Israel, support for that has really plummeted as a result of the atrocities of 10/7. So I'm not sure I see the prospects for that. And of course, a lot is caught up in what happens with Hamas as well.
Exactly. Almost last word, please. But your sense, this is about opportunity.
I'd love to see it happen, by the way.
Oh, absolutely.
Fantastic.
You said there's real opportunity here
Yep.
with these tectonic changes. How do we seize that opportunity for Israel and ultimately for the region?
Yeah, I think I covered it in my previous remarks on saying, let's finish the war in Gaza, do the normalization with the Saudis, with some Palestinian element, and go to Iran. And maybe normalization, or at least non-belligerency, with Lebanon, without Hezbollah.
Right.
So Lebanon and Israel has nothing really in conflict. For years, when I was a kid, my father told me, we don't know what is the first Arab country that will make peace with Israel. Lebanon is second. Haven't happened because of Hezbollah and Iran.
Right.
So we can do normalization with Lebanon and normalization with Syria if the leader of Syria, the president, will choose the right path.
That's critical.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and not go back to his Al-Qaeda roots. But on the two-state solution, because you cannot finish without it, the two-state solution were destroyed by Sinwar, by Hamas. Because what they have done, they move the Israeli public to the right. Nobody will agree to a Palestinian state in the coming decade. Maybe after a different education for a whole generation in Gaza and the West Bank as well, because the West Bank supported the atrocity of the 7th of October. So in Israel, if you speak today on two-state solution, you are doomed politically. You will not have one member of parliament, so of Knesset. So the two-state solution will have to wait. We'll have to wait. And after saying that, I think that we can find a wording that the Saudis will accept to go forward, which say we need a political solution, we need an irreversible path for Palestinian entity based on performance. Performance that has to do with denouncing terror, fighting terror. Most important even is education. A different education to live in peace with Israel. Because what they demonstrating in your streets is Palestine from the river to the sea, which is to say Israel is not there.
Our streets.
Your streets,
exactly.
your students.
Yep.
I'm a visiting fellow in Harvard. It's not easy there. I'm not running away, I'm fighting, but this is what they are shouting in the street. So it's much more difficult. And for David, I have to say something about Gaza, because Gaza is not Fallujah. Gaza is Germany.
Sure.
Germany, Nazi Germany. When you went to destroy Nazi Germany, you haven't done all this counter-insurgent. Gaza is a Palestinian state that we evacuate on every inch to the 5th of June 67 border. We dismantle all the settlements. And instead of building there Abu Dhabi or Singapore, they have built a terror state. And this terror state attack us, which not happened in Fallujah. And you can always disengage to America beyond the Mediterranean and the ocean. We have no any intention to disengage from the kibbutzim near Gaza.
Yes.
So security is number one. We will destroy Hamas, not tomorrow, but one of these days in the near future, in the coming 2 years, we will do what we call in Israel Moed Bet. You know what is Moed Bet? It's a B period. If you are not good enough in the first examination, in the first test in the university, you have a right to go to a second test. And if you pass, you pass. When I came to Harvard as a student, say, where is Moed Bet here? Say, no Moed Bet in American. However, we will have to do another round.
Yeah.
We have a new chief of staff starting today, and he already declared that if Hamas is not going, and by the way, supported by your president, just tweeted on that Hamas has to go and all the hostages have to come back, and if not, he will support Israel. Because one of the reasons that we were not that successful on the first round, that the US limited us all the time. Yeah. And hold the bombs, which make Senwar thinking that he can split Israel and America. And the main goal of the previous administration, and by every administration, not to escalate the war in the Middle East, in a way they shoot their own leg. Because they encourage Senwar, they encourage Nasrallah before he left. So Hamas is also not ISIS, because ISIS was not supported by any country in the world. Any country in the world. You have a coalition, you led a coalition, 78 countries.
65 countries.
65 countries, including the bad guys.
That's
Iran and Russia were with you.
And China.
And Hamas is supported by Turkey, by Qatar, somehow a lot of money from the Arab world. Even Russia and China support.
But you allowed that money to flow in, the prime minister did.
So,
he allowed Qatar to provide that money.
So I think, I love to have reminiscence of 7 of June 1981, when I dropped 2 bombs on the Iraqi nuclear reactor. And you love the surge, and this is wonderful. You did a wonderful job. But it's not the same case.
I said it's not the same case. I said that all of what we did together was not as hard as what you're going to do there. There's just not, I don't see how you destroy Hamas if you don't take control of the territory.
Wait a year and you will see.
Okay.
Well,
That's a long time.
let me step in to preserve U.S.-Israeli relations here. One quick thing. This morning we talked about Europe.
Oh, dear.
And American vital interests in Europe. We talked about the Middle East and American vital interests in the Middle East. We also talked about East Asia. And I flew here from Taiwan, and the leadership of Taiwan with whom I met is listening to every single word being spoken in Washington, being spoken in Kyiv, being spoken in Brussels, being spoken around the world, because they think they're next. And so we need to be thinking, as you properly did ask the question about Taiwan, we've got to be thinking about Taiwan as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Let's stand up and give him a hand.
Thank you, my friend.
There we go.
Thank you.
And thank you for today, and thank you for your decades of service to our countries. Thank you very much. Now, they went into overtime, so I added a half hour to the bar being open. So, it cost me a lot of money there, Amos. But my pleasure. Please, if you would like to join us over at the bungalow across the drive, food, dinner, drinks will be served till 7:30 p.m. So thank you.